Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey Patrick, it feels like we've been through nothing at all for a fair bit. Feels like quite the while ago since we last met on Practical Nerds. How have you
Perhaps two
been?
weeks. Doing good, and I find it interesting that you picked my outfit today.
I was going to ask you the same. I was asking, hey, have you been stalking me? Like, what led to this choice of color? Um,
Ah,
I feel like saying great minds think alike. I don't know which of us is a great mind, so maybe we don't go with that.
hmm. Some kind of minds think alike.
Some kind of minds think alike. Let's run with that.
Nice. So after 2 weeks break, what do you want to talk about?
I was thinking, and guess what? I actually reflected a little bit for a change on
No,
what we should
really.
talk about. Yeah, that's a second. The first being our episode on idioms. I was thinking, hey, we have spoken about obviously the construction industry at large. We have spoken about business models in spaces. We have spoken about specific geographies, specific countries. We have even profiled specific founders and companies. We have spoken about certain traits we want to see in companies. But hey, lo and behold, what I realized is we haven't spoken about perhaps what is most important, or maybe one of the most important aspects of what we or any other VC worth their salt should be looking at
Hmm.
is founders, right? And what we, as a construction tech founder, what do we look for in the businesses and the founders who meet us and pitch to us, right? So I thought, why not talk about that? Why not let that cat out of the bag finally?
I like it, and throughout the episode, we will also. Um, I think there's a lot of general um, aspects, traits, behaviors that we're going to talk about, but we'll try to bring it into the context of the markets that we cover: construction tech, supply chain logistics, 3D design, blue collar workforce, and so on. Because there are a few things that actually work a little bit better in our spaces, are a little bit more important in our spaces. So
Mhm.
we'll tie those together. And I guess to kick us off, so you and I, we did our 2 minutes preparation. And this one was fairly simple because the framework we have in mind, we actually developed over the years of doing fundamental. And so to kick us off, for all the listeners, we think about founder traits and behaviors in four buckets. The first one is how do they think about their business? The second one is how do the founders think about operating their business? The third one is how do they think about product and product building? And the fourth one is how do they think about partnership? So we'll walk through these four buckets today. And Shub, I'm gonna ask you kicking it off. Let's start talking about thinking about business.
Mhm.
What is something that you look for in founders and how they think about their business?
Hmm. So, it's quite interesting, and there's so many layers to uncover here. Uh, I think the first thing what I've realized is uh, if you put yourself in the shoes of the typical VC, the typical founder that's glorified in all the stories that we've heard from Silicon Valley, right? From if not decades ago, at least from say the late '90s, early 2000s, it's this idea of this visionary founder who's incredibly confident, incredibly sure of him or herself, and the legendary investors who just get it right and who know exactly how things are going to play out, and that's seemingly how it plays out. What I realize is, and by the way, this is at least what is told. We It's difficult sometimes to figure out if this is how it played out. What I have seen in the sample set that we have dealt with, and at this point, our sample set is quite considerable. over the last 6 years,
Right.
and a very, very high representation of the best performing construct firms around the world. I would say there is almost zero overlap of founders being super visionary, super sure of themselves, extra confident about what is going to happen, and that correlating with future success. So I think the
Mm.
first common trait I've found, and this may be a personal trait, maybe it's a way of how they think about their business. Most founders assume that things are much tougher, much more uncertain, because they assume that construction as an industry is more difficult to be certain about, because certain things at a macro level may not go their way. A lot of times their clients' situations may change. Um, Things may arise in terms of competitive situations which are not as straightforward, or generally things move in a step function way, they don't move very gradually, so you have to keep hanging around until you see that step function abrupt change in fortunes. So the very best founders, and this is true for people with considerable experience, right, repeat founders, repeat successful founders even, who have all the right ticks in the box for a business that they're about to start, even then you'll find they're extremely humble about what they don't know, what they're
Mm.
not sure about, what the uncertainties in the business, and they're prepared for it. And it's not a sign, they don't express it as a sign of insecurity, they just have a frank conversation, and this of course relates to what we're going to talk about in the partnership aspect. But that's who they are, just living the reality of the uncertainties of the industry. And of course this goes hand in hand with construction not being very digitized, and that they're prepared for it. So in other words, having this risk averse mindset, I know it perhaps sounds very odd coming from a venture investor, that a founder should have a risk averse mindset. It is not to say you don't take risk, but you are prepared for things not going your way, and yet you build a business that compounds in spite of it.
So I think the humility, I would have tied it back to something else that I could have referenced, but you did it better than I could, is the maturity. I look for maturity in
Hmm.
founders, and I've really learned that. I think this is something that was lower on my priority list years ago, but it has become a quite high priority item, and so I look for signals of maturity. And humility is one of such signals, how you approach things, and how you approach your own knowledge, and what you don't know, etc. Um, it serves a business in B2B markets, and especially in the very difficult construction, logistics, blue collar related markets, which have a lot of nuance, a lot of detail, which you deal with experts in the markets that do this for 35, 40, sometimes 50 years, dealing with these nuances. And I'm not sure people today or founders today that move into construction are still making this experience, but 5, 6 years ago, you would meet a lot of founders that thought they had drunk the Kool-Aid,
Hmm.
and that would go to customers explaining, "Oh, for 30 years you've been doing it wrong, and now I'm going to sing the gospel, and please listen and chime in." And
Yeah.
so customers really have gotten quite disenchanted with that type of behavior, and that lacks maturity. And so maturity kicking into our sectors, like I look for signals like that. The other thing that I wanted to react to in what you say and take it over to what I look for as well is I look for founders who think of their business in terms of what's controllable and uncontrollable.
Hmm.
So, early stage startup, someone other than me famously wrote that in the end, out of 10 things, you control 3 to 4.
Hmm.
How good is your product? How good is your go to market in a way? How good do you recruit?
Yeah.
And a few other things. Out of those 10 things, you don't control 3 to 4 others. What's your competitors doing? Where do the interest rates in the markets go to? What's
Yeah.
the regulation going to be like? You just don't control it. It does not matter how much you want to think it or will it into existence. There's no Jedi mind tricks.
Hmm.
You don't control these things.
Yeah.
And then there's 1, 2 things that are just pure luck. You
Hmm.
don't even know they're out there. They're just unknown unknowns. And in the end, over a 10-year plus lifetime of your company, you know, they hopefully break your way.
Hmm.
You need to acknowledge that as a founder. And I look for signals how a founder focuses on the things that they control in
Yes.
the business. And that's where they allocate resources. And they don't allocate resources, especially not substantial resources, towards the things you don't control.
Hmm.
So that's something that I look for, is these signals that a founder thinks like that.
I'm glad you said this. Actually, this ties in very well with what I was going to, another point I had in mind, which perhaps, touches both product and business. I think in many other verticals, most notably in consumerish verticals, but also many other industries like say healthcare and so on, there is a premium, if I could use that word, attached to being novel, right? Being disruptive, right? Being innovative and so on. And I think
You mean like vegan protein dog bars?
yes, that's exactly what exactly what I mean.
I
And
read your mind.
uh, and there are, of course, even in construction, right? We have had cohorts or waves of such founders where, for some reason, there's this perception that you represent this cool new piece of technology, and that's what's the game changer in construction. What I think what we always had an instinct for, but now it's just sort of got crystallized, is
Mhm.
that's perhaps not a good starting point for what your business or product should be. It could be that, but be prepared. If that's the path you're choosing, you better sign up for a very long product development cycle, right? It's not something that'll you can flip the switch on in a year or so. You're probably looking at a 5 6 year, if not longer, horizon for to properly find product market fit. But if that's not what you have got planned, then the mindset is of a completely different nature. What you're not thinking necessarily of what's innovative, what's groundbreaking, what's disruptive. You're thinking of, hey, what's the hidden and obvious, sorry, obvious but hidden. Okay, let me rephrase that. Obvious but hidden, low hanging fruit, and how do I solve for it in a way that's scalable? That's sort of like the, if I may sort of summarize, these are the sorts of unique insights that the best founders have found a way to capitalize on. And it
Yeah.
quite often seems surprisingly mundane, simplistic, almost looking like, and we have, of course, said this in multiple episodes up front, not looking, you not use these adjectives to describe a venture. But that's another thing where, from the from the point of view of building a business or building a product, for the most part, that's another crucial way in which the best construction tech founders seem to be wired differently.
And just to put this into like to be crystal clear here, what you mean by hidden but obvious, or obvious but hidden. So the obvious part is it's obvious, or it has become obvious to the founder, and
Hmm.
it's obvious to the customer, but it's
Yes,
hidden to competitors. It's
correct,
hidden to general investors or late stage investors just yet.
yes,
So that's what we mean by obvious but hidden.
correct, absolutely.
Yeah, so a lot of that has to do also with exactly what you control, and focusing on that. Another thing that I have come to appreciate how people and founders specifically think about their business is, I like founders who think of their business in terms of the ownership they have in the business and not the fundraising events
Hmm.
that they can generate. I do appreciate founders who have the price per share in mind, because that covers
Yeah,
a range of different things that in the end culminate, like dilution, for example, that culminate in the share price. So I do appreciate that as well, thinking of that in terms of their business. But more importantly, or more important to me, is thinking of their own ownership, and not in terms of big PR, big fundraising events, um, you name it. In fact, we had, so a fun anecdote to remind people. I mean, regular readers of mine will remember this. We had done this analysis, I want to say mid 23, on AECVC.com, where we actually back tested the success of like media pundits in picking companies based on big fundraisings, big PR, how good they are in getting into news media. And so we backtested how those companies actually played out since 2016, I think was the earliest sample that we
yeah.
took.
Hmm.
The result was, I mean, it was quite shocking how poor the pundits, the media were at picking eventual winners versus picking companies that got, for some reason, some media traction or some fundraising
Yeah.
traction. And in fact, we even concluded that the best performing companies in our portfolio in the first 4 years were never once mentioned in any of these media.
Yeah. I think
That
if I remember, uh, one thought I had while going through that piece of yours in ACVC, I almost felt it's a very good thing to not be covered by any of these best of lists in your first 4 or 5 years. I think that actually enhances your chances of going bigger.
There's for sure the correlation. I think the causation you're pointing to, my intuition is the same. I couldn't
Mm.
like it's tough to prove it really,
Yeah.
but my intuition is very much the same. And so that relates back to my point. So just to close the circle here about thinking about your business in terms of business ownership and not in terms of, oh my God, ABC talks about me and this talks about me and that talks about me and here's a big fundraising event. Think about your business as a business.
Hmm.
I can't make it any dumber than that. But you would be, I mean, not you, but like many people would be surprised if they came into our job, how few people think of their business as a business. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable sometimes.
Yeah. You're right. Hey, so the four buckets we had was business, product, partnerships, and what was the other one?
How they operate their business. Perhaps let's move over there. So, what are you looking for in how people, in how founders operate their business?
Hmm. So I think the first thing perhaps to talk about, which ties in with what you said about fundraising, getting very excited about PR and stuff. And I guess in the current season that we are in, it probably is not such a mind blowing insight, but it's useful nevertheless to zoom out and reflect. I think there's been no case in construction tech where a pure land grab strategy has ever worked
Ooh, good
in
point.
building a successful business. I think when you have, for example, B2C e-commerce, you can just go all guns blazing on land grab and assume that at least one of the firms which does this will last and win. I think there is literally no example of that strategy purely working in construction tech, or at
I
least,
can't think. I can't think of one right now, but I can think of examples where the strategy was tried and failed blazingly.
yeah.
So, for example, in like the um, quick commerce and warehousing
Hmm.
space, we had companies that kind of proved it in one city, and then they wanted to do basically city land grab
Yes.
against other competitors.
Hmm.
All of them in the end burnt a lot of money, and some of them actually went bust publicly.
Yeah. Or even I guess this could be another point but is related, but I think it's useful to bring this up, especially because you brought up quick commerce. This whole notion that, hey, we can subsidize users or subsidize transactions, and eventually things will improve once we have the customers on our platform.
Oh,
It doesn't work. And I think just to hammer home that point, right? If there are still founders or investors listening to us and wondering why that may not be the case, because someone may say, "Hey, you know what? It happens all the time in e-commerce. Why would that be any different in construction?" The difference is when you look at a B2C e-commerce case, the goods being bought for the most part, they are not part of the person's. They're not critical to the survival or the livelihood of the buyer, as in it's not existential in that sense. If, for example, or let me hold that thought. I'll come back to this. But for example, if you're a business buying cement or steel or paint or some other building material, if the price of that material goes up 5 or 10%, it has the potential to completely wipe out your bottom line. So you can't arbitrarily assume that, hey, if you've set a certain baseline with regard to prices, and that's what the purchasing decision is, that if you just raise prices suddenly one day, they'll just carry on because they are, quote unquote, on the platform. It can completely change the nature of your customer's existence in entirety if they're not on the same playing field, or they don't have the same understanding of what the basis of the transaction is.
yeah, if that happens across a few categories, absolutely.
Hmm.
Actually, I want to give an anecdote here because it sometimes makes these things so, you know, tangible.
Yes.
So to that point of like subsidizing growth,
Mm-hmm.
I run. I learned to run. I had an anecdote with a founder. This was late 21, early 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Founder previously he called himself an operator, but I'll
Okay.
come back to that because he was not an operator. He worked for one of the large ride hailing groups as like employee number 10,000
Mm-hmm.
and worked in a team that, I mean, some people might be surprised that these things existed in the ride hailing companies. He worked for a team continentally
Mm-hmm.
that oversaw 1 billion of driver subsidies.
Okay.
And the job of that team was, hey, here's the billion, figure out in an analytical way in which routes of a city, first of all, which cities and which routes of a city dynamically we should allocate the subsidies to in order to
Mm.
drive business to the platform. So the person was a cost center,
Yeah.
was not an operator. No
Yeah.
P&L, no product building, no customer interaction, no operations, was a cost center.
Mm-hmm.
So this founder now founded a marketplace in construction,
Mm-hmm.
along with a few buddies. And I talked to him in the pre-seed round. And at that time, we already had several um, successful building materials marketplaces in our portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
We knew what we wanted to look for. And so the founder then went, when I asked him how he thinks about his gross margin, I kid you not, he said, well, the first 2 to 3 years, I will run with a negative gross margin, not negative contribution margin. That's bad enough. He
Yeah.
said negative gross margin
Mm-hmm.
in order to find as much growth as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was already concerned that the business that he would be building was only set up to be a spot marketplace for
Yeah.
emergency purchases, but not a one-stop shop, not a repeat shop, not something that would actually creep into the capacity of suppliers, etc. And then he puts that on top of me. And
Mm-hmm.
once I realized what he just said and how that comes from the school he had gone through, meaning let's disperse 1 billion of driver subsidies, haha,
Yeah.
I ran as fast as possible.
Mm.
So operating a business on a negative gross margin,
Yeah.
I don't even have words for it. I can't say just categorically enough how much I will run away from something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I think I mean, we've several examples of firms who have started with this strategy, assumed it is valid in B2B and in construction more specifically. And time and again, it leads to, in the best case, stalling growth. But in most cases, growth starts to really, go the other direction and the business starts to shrink quite dramatically when that's what they do. So it's really not a direction that works well in construction.
And I mean, okay, I mean, we could really go down this rabbit hole, but I think, you know, point made. Other things in how founders operate their business. So I like founders that, without me having to prompt them,
Hmm.
prioritize at the right moment in time, not too distant in the company's lifetime, a plan how to get to net profitability.
Yes.
I call it the dolphin mentality. So
Okay.
perhaps I've mentioned it here. If not, I'll repeat it. So
Uh-huh.
dolphin mentality is that the dolphin comes up for air
Yes.
and then submerges again and later comes up for air again. So
Hmm.
coming up for air in this analogy is the dolphin is net profitable.
Okay.
And that's when the dolphin ideally should raise money.
Hmm.
When you raise money, you raise it for a purpose. You raise it for, doing more product development, testing new hypotheses, entering a new market, and so on and so forth, doing more marketing in a specific scope, all of that, right? So after the round, it's very typical, most VC investors will know this. It's very typical that actually a lot of your metrics in the first 6 to 12 months post a round will actually take a dive, hence
Yeah.
the dolphin analogy. Why? Well, because the investments you're making, be it in team or be it in new channels, new markets, etc., well, they take a time to
Yes.
come to fruition,
Hmm.
right? No decision and no resource allocation in this world shows results in a day.
Yeah.
So that's why after the round, the dolphin submerges.
Hmm.
But then I want the founders to think of, hey, how do I actually make the dolphin come up again
Hmm.
prior to the next round? And
Hmm.
don't take this as like, oh, this is exactly what you should be doing, like dolphin, and now, woo, between every round, I need to be net profitable. So that's not the point. But the point is that your mindset? Is that something that you can demonstrate to your investors as well as the culture of your business, the team, that
Yeah.
this is how you want to be building a business?
Yes.
Is that how you want to be operating?
Hmm. So I like that, and I think as a strategic, overarching emphasis of the organization, that is absolutely what we look for. I mean, frankly, I would say in every organization that is capable of building in that sort of trajectory, I would say if you reduce that down to a more tactical, granular plan, what I didn't always start this with this sort of looking for this quality, but over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years, what I really like when I find that quality is someone who's an excellent bookkeeper. And I find that to be, in my opinion at least, have a very good correlation with, if not the firm being a blockbuster, but a very high likelihood of the firm being well run, likely to not get into trouble, likely to be a compounder in some sense. Usually because at any point of time, it's very easy for anyone dealing with that founder, or frankly anyone in the team, because the books are so well maintained and hopefully also legit, assuming they're well maintained and legit. I mean, we have covered a different we covered a different episode on when they're not legit, so check that out. But assuming in this case that they're legit, oh yeah, one more characteristic is founders don't. We look for founders that don't fudge their financials.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes, so I guess taking that as a given, I think when you have the terms used are different in different geographies. For example, in some places you'd call it MIS, in some countries you'd call it something else. But it's very easy for everyone, the founders, the key employees, all the investors, to be very aligned with where you stand as a company. And I think we'll come back to this point again when we talk about partnership. But I think that is one of the starting points of building a great company. In order to set yourself goals for success, you have to set up your reporting methodology so that
Exactly.
everyone knows what the targets are, where you stand. It's sort of like you always have your lab reports or your blood work or your x-rays always available, and it's like if you don't make them available, make them easily readable with by all your investors or your key employees, you're just shooting off the hip, making random guesses as to what is going wrong, etc. And by the way, that is putting kindly. A lot of times founders just don't invest in that because it's too much work, or they're lazy, or frankly sometimes maybe they're scared what it'll uncover if they dig too much into the data, and if it shows weaknesses in the business.
I fully agree. I mean, one of the lamest excuses in that regard is no, we're right now product building.
Yeah.
Okay, so on what telemetry are you building your product? It's the exact same thing. It's a mentality that
Hmm.
you run your business by knowing your numbers. And the numbers in different stages of your business will be different numbers. That's part of the job of the founder as well, is like figuring out what numbers actually tell you how to operate toward the next goal achievement for the stage of the business that you're in. And that changes over time,
Hmm.
right? If you're an open source software in construction tech building data interoperability for the different construction softwares out there, well, you will have to do a lot of product building, a lot of product building. So no one expects you in the first years to come up with an absolutely fantastic management information system that shows all the working capital, because you won't have any, and revenue, and cash and whatsoever. No, but you need to run product telemetry, how to actually judge and gauge what is going on. And so the mentality behind that
Yeah.
is you want your entire team aimed towards the same objectives using the same metrics and the same telemetry. And so
Yes.
if a founder doesn't really run it that way, operate their business that way, it is a big red warning sign.
Yeah, I think, and this is obviously not for every firm what I'm about to say, but it's something again which I found evolves into a situation with a handful of very, very well run businesses where at some point you lose, if you maintain your books well enough, maintain your management information system well enough, and that itself is very comprehensive, which by the way is a lot of work, but let's assume that's comprehensive. There might come a time you actually don't even need to update your pitch decks. In fact, you don't need anything else. That is literally everything.
Bang on.
Yeah.
Bang
And for
on.
me, if you get to that point, that's a great place to be as a business. That is
And
perhaps
now,
the point. Go for it.
eh, so we're eating our own dog food here. I just want to
Yeah.
make this clear because our business is partnering with founders, investing and returning, right?
Hmm.
So that's literally the product. In the end, venture capital is a financial asset class.
Hmm.
Shub, I am so flabbergasted how many founders of venture firms
Hmm.
delegate CFO tasks.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. Like you're running a financial product, and the first thing you think is, how can I sip more cocktails
Hmm.
sitting on the beach by delegating my unpleasant CFO tasks to someone else? Because my job is whining and dining. I honestly cannot believe it. And I cannot believe that LPs are not actually looking for that more in their diligence than they do. In Fundamental, we don't do that. It's
Yeah.
literally a general partner running the whole CFO stack, entering the numbers on his own.
Hmm.
Because we're a financial product. Like the same dog food that we're talking about here, what is the product of a founder that we partner with? They should know their telemetry. We
Yeah.
apply the same thing to us. It's just a universal business principle.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Right. And I think that if you zoom even further out, or as far out as possible, that's perhaps, I think, the big message in how you run your business. You may say, okay, what's so specific about construction? I think what is more specific about construction is it's, in most cases, unless you're building a new age software, for example, or a new age platform, for the most part, it is a business, excuse me, dealing with lots of small transactions, lots of small things coming together in a repeated fashion many, many times. And therefore, you as a founder and as a team need the ability to handle all this complexity and report it with granularity.
Hmm.
As in, not to, how do I say this? Take the complexity, but not lose the granularity. Are you following what I'm saying? Because I
I
think the
do. Yep.
granularity is what sets great founders apart from somewhat good founders, but who are perhaps not at quite at the league to deal with the complexity of construction.
Yeah, one orange warning sign there is when founders start reporting quarterly because all
Yes.
monthly doesn't tell the story. Or
Yes.
hold on, time out. Like I don't want to be told a story, and neither should you want to tell a story to yourself. It is the granularity
Hmm.
that tells you how you should operate your business. There's nothing wrong with being in a seasonal business
Hmm.
as long as you deduct the management actions from it. But
Yeah.
how can you do that when you just constantly abstract everything?
Yes. I feel like we are gradually bleeding into the point about partnership. So, do you want to? Should we go there?
Do you want to? Okay, let's go with partnerships and then we'll cover product last.
Okay.
So, with regard to partnership, so we're going to publish a big piece in the next couple of weeks online. And so, this is a little bit of a, I guess, tease or whatever. But one of the things that it's a very, very long piece. And so, one of the things that we're discussing in that long piece is investors and founders treating each other as treasured partners, treating the relationship as one of the assets in the business, next to customers, next to the product, next to the employees. It's an
Hmm.
asset. And so we have really learned to look for founders that give us signals and indications in their behaviors that this is their mindset, that they see the relationship with shareholders as a treasured asset. And actually, the best judgment or the best indicator is not how they treat the shareholder with the highest share, which
Hmm.
oftentimes we are. It's much more telling how a founder behaves towards the smallest shareholders on the
Yeah.
cap table. That is very revealing about their
Yes.
mindset.
Yes. And in fact, if you recall, Patrick, we had done an analysis. I think it was a year or two ago. We did an analysis of the best performing companies slash positions in our portfolio, and we found there to be a very high correlation between founders who have done us a solid, right, and who have generally not put us in a position where we have to, choose between two suboptimal outcomes, right, um, and eventual success or eventual returns. There's a surprisingly high correlation, right?
It is.
We can't take names right now, but I can tell you some of our top positions. At some point in the last 3 4 years, they have done us a big favor, and I'm very grateful to them. So if you're listening, many thanks to each of you for doing that, right? So in some cases we were larger shareholders, in some cases we were smaller shareholders, and we were done a favor, and that's why we have stuck by them and they have stuck by us, and I'm immensely grateful. It speaks a lot to their character and maturity that they did that, and it also speaks to them looking at it as a partnership. And that's going to be my, I guess, the point I'm tethering this to. What I really have developed an apathy to is, um, I mean, I can understand that happening before investment, but let's say after investment, when a conversation feels like it's a sales pitch, or a
Hmm.
review meeting feels like a sales pitch, that's when I know that I'm perhaps not getting the unfiltered truth, right?
Hmm.
I feel like the only time we can all get together and talk about where to take the business, what the fundraising needs are, what to do here, is if everyone is comfortable in being vulnerable and showing everything for what it is, right? And not sort of hiding it or pretending like it may exist, but we don't know, or we'll have to look into it, or let's check back on it, etc. All those cute little excuses. I
It's
think
the opposite of storytelling.
exactly, and that's another thing. It's on my wish list that more founders practice. I think. I mean, look, you could say VCs have brought it upon themselves that because we often make promises and so on and lead founders down a certain path. Therefore, we are perpetually on this path, perhaps where founders see that they need to keep selling things to us and they need to make these hard pitches.
Oh, that's a good point. I'll come back to that.
Yeah. And therefore, they need to keep making hard pitches both pre and post investment. I have to say, and we have enough empirical data to support this, it does not lead to good outcomes. It just eventually the bubble bursts in terms of expectation management, and it doesn't go so well. And to be honest, it doesn't speak very well for your character as a leader and as an individual if you're to always be in pitching mode with people who are, as you rightly said, eating the same dog food as you.
There's so much to agree here and tack on. So first of all, everything that you just said, just to tie it something we said earlier, maturity.
Hmm.
All of that oftentimes is a side effect of someone that is mature, the
Hmm.
ability to be vulnerable, etc. Secondly, what something that it's difficult to kind of have this conversation before becoming partners, but after you became partners, something that I found in the best founders in how they think about partnership is I keep telling the founders I work with, don't even think about the external fundraising market when you think about fundraising.
Hmm.
Make sure that the biggest fans of your business and the ones who actually want to keep putting more money are the existing shareholders. Because if you
Yeah.
can't excite them, how much more likely are you to excite someone else? Well,
Yes.
some founders might think, actually, I might be much more likely because I
Yeah.
can feed them a story,
Yeah.
because I can hide information and I can use the information asymmetry against them. If that's the mode you're in, you're actually not building a business.
Yeah.
All you're doing is building a story.
Hmm.
Now, the ones that build a business, they are the ones that think about how do I excite my existing shareholders. The principle is simple. Retention is cheaper than acquisition.
Yeah.
Every founder that is worth their salt already knows that on the business side, retention is cheaper than acquisition. It counts for your existing shareholders as well. So if you excite your existing shareholders, you have damn good chances to have a lot of excitement
Yeah.
with non-shareholders as well. It's such a simple principle and so rarely practiced except for the very best
Hmm.
founders. So I think that's something that is, for me, after you have partnered, it becomes very indicative of what kind of partnership you're in. And then the other point I just wanted to briefly mention, so being doing each other a solid, that's a two-way street.
Yes.
And I have literally never been disappointed by a founder that had, I felt like they had the right mindset about our partnership, etc. And we stepped in a difficult situation. We gave a term sheet when another term sheet not exploded, went away, right? So these situations, every few years, they do happen. We stepped in, we said, we believe in you, let's go.
Yeah.
And I never need to ask in this situation, if I already know we're in the right partnership, oh, but now please give me like this right or that right. No, you just know they will take care of you later
Yeah.
down the line. And vice versa. Like when the founders do us a solid, they know we'll do them one too.
Yes.
It has happened countless times
Hmm.
in my life because that's how partnerships work. Whereas the founders who can't do you a solid, who constantly think transactional,
Hmm. Yeah.
well, that's the relationships they are building. That's the
Yeah.
partnership they are building.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. And I also, I mean, a softer point perhaps doesn't not directly relevant perhaps for most companies, but something to keep in mind. I also do have a liking. I mean, some would say it's a prerequisite, but where if you have multiple founders in a company and there are unusual situations where one of those founders has to make a sacrifice in favor of the other for the good of the business, they go ahead and do it regardless of the pain or the sacrifice it implies. Again, perhaps a super specific data point that may not apply in too many cases, but again, that's something which, if it ever occurs, I find that a very good predictor and something that I deeply respect if it comes into play.
so making sacrifices on the product side and how you prioritize product building. That's the fourth and final bucket we want to talk about
Hmm.
today. When it comes to product, I generally gravitate towards founders who think in the early years of their product or in the later years where they keep adding new, let's say, side products, spin-off products, new business lines. I gravitate towards founders that think of their product in terms of frequency. Now,
Hmm.
this is something you don't hear a lot, so let me explain. Product is a result of discovery.
Hmm.
And the early years of a business or the early years of a new product spin-off, you actually will usually not know immediately whether you're on the right track. That's why you need discovery and you benefit from optionality, meaning you build optionality into your product path. As you discover, you build different options and routes where to take your product, and then you discover more and more and more. So the discovery and the optionality are a result of building frequency.
Okay.
If you get your product in front of customers or users too infrequently, my experience in the markets that we cover is that it's that much more unlikely
Hmm.
that you're building a great product through great discovery and with the right level of optionality. So I look for people who think in terms of frequency. Now,
Hmm.
frequency could be expressed in like financial transactions. Think
Hmm.
of a marketplace, right?
Hmm.
So I would much rather work in the early years with a founder that thinks of their marketplace product in terms of, you know what, I'm okay if I perhaps only serve a super narrow niche, but with that niche, I develop or just one category,
Yeah.
one type of transaction. But with that one, I develop frequency. It allows me to discover, earn track record, optionality, and so on. Then working with a founder, and by the way, this is extremely expressive in robotics. So
Hmm.
the best robotics founders we have in our portfolio think in terms of frequency. They are product people. They actually think of very quick iterations of getting the robot to do something. One company in my portfolio does at least one product test on their robot a day.
Hmm.
They disassemble the whole robot in the evening, they reassemble it in a new configuration in the morning, and then they test it. They actually get it on a site and let it run. That's frequency. I look for frequency in terms of product.
Nice. I think another vector to think along the lines of, it's quite similar to what you said, and perhaps highly correlated, is to focus on pull use cases rather than push use cases in product design, whether it's any of the things you mentioned, marketplaces, robots, software, AI. And what I mean by pull use cases is going back to our earlier discussion on business, is again, there's a temptation to build technology or features or marketplace capabilities one on top of the other and have this final shiny piece of business proposition which you then unveil to customers. It rarely, that strategy I find rarely works well in construction. In the sense, what perhaps is a better strategy is you have something functional even if it looks minimal, and see if that gets a pull in from the your initial set of customers.
Right.
And if there's a pull, usually that pull will suggest, if that is good enough, what other incremental features need to be added, what changes need to be made, and perhaps what other adjacent services or adjacent products can be offered as the next. And you may have to also be nimble as a Construtech founder in what is comes next. I mean, it's a repeat theme we've seen in our best founders, where quite often they start with, if it's a marketplace business, one or two categories. If it's a software business, a certain set of solutions in software. And then their clients ask for, hey, will you also do this other thing?
Yes.
And it goes in. It wasn't one of the.
Sorry, there was a thunder right over my head.
No worries at all. I guess that, what a thunderous statement. So that's also something that construction tech founders need to be aware of. I mean, I like to refer to it as nimbleness or agility, in the
Mhm.
sense, you may have a certain plan A on, hey, this is the set of products and services I'll offer. But keep in mind, in conjunction with the first offering you made, perhaps the client has a need, and I am stressing on the word need very carefully here, has a need for something else to follow what you initially offered. And it may be a deviation from your original plan, but that may not be a bad idea. We have seen many instances where these deviations end up being very good semi pivots.
I have such a great example from this week that demonstrates, I think, everything that you just laid out. So I'm talking to a firm in the logistics for construction sites
Okay.
space.
Hmm.
So this founder is an accomplished second-time founder. Previous company was a construction software business. Went reasonably well. Had a lot of experience. Founder is very mature. Entire founder team is very mature. His mentality going into his next company, building this logistics for construction sites business, was number one, I'm going to build net profitable. Great. I mean, I personally like that.
Hmm.
But secondly, he was, hey, I don't want to narrow my repeatability too much in the first years. I'm
Hmm.
going to offer a specific service.
Hmm.
I will actually use manpower. I will be on a construction site,
Hmm.
orchestrating certain aspects of the logistics of this customer. And
Okay.
that's what I sell them. I'm offering as a contractor.
Hmm.
As I do that on several sites, I will figure out what I can standardize for myself. And instead of pushing, to your point, the software into the contractors, he's going into the business which they are pulling for, which is, it's a service, there's a P&L line item, be
Hmm.
my contractor.
Hmm.
What happened? He says, well, after a while, my customers asked me, hey, you're actually recording all these flows
Hmm.
around my construction site. By chance, couldn't you also tell me what my CO2 footprint from the logistics on the site is? He said, yeah, I could. I can even give you a dashboard. No. I don't need the dashboard. I
Hmm.
just need the report. I
Yeah.
said, no problem. Here's an additional contract. Sign me for the report. And so
Nice.
This is back to frequency. Discovery creates optionality. So he built this optionality into it. And then he said, you know what? Perhaps I should offer this to other clients as well after I had gotten in through the wedge of the original logistics service.
Yeah.
Then what happened is that customers asked him, hey, we also have this canteen and this post office on large construction sites. We always have different suppliers. Why don't you take over those shared services as well? No problem. I can do that for you.
Hmm.
It's a perfect, and the company is net profitable. It's a perfect example
Yeah.
of everything that you have just been saying.
The thing is, what you described may seem as like this crazy esoteric example, but you and I know it's actually not that uncommon if it's a well-run business. And this is the flip side, right? So everyone is quick to point out that, hey, construction is so manual, so undigitized, not much tech happening. But that is exactly why, if you are a scalable business delivering great products or services, it is very likely that that by itself is an unfair advantage, and which is why
Exactly.
you'll be
It's
at
track
the
record.
you'll be at the top of the queue when it comes to thinking about service providers or solution providers for other pain points.
Absolutely. It's your
Yeah.
track record, and they know they can trust you because they're in a very volatile business, in a chaotic business sometimes that is difficult to control. They will entrust it to a partner that has proven that they can control it reliably anytime. And so the fact that you do software with it, you don't have to sell the software to do that. In fact, you can oftentimes capture more value. But what will the generic SaaS investors tell you? Oh my God, don't go there. I need 85% gross margin in year
Yes.
one and 130% net dollar retention. And the only way how to build a business is SaaS. No, it is not.
Yeah.
Not in construction. It's perfectly made for this, but it takes a mature founder, a founder that wants to build a business, not a story, and all the trades we have been talking today to figure these things out. In
Yeah.
fact, another anecdote, one of our best performing Fund 2 companies, an early rocket ship, insane, within 2 years from pre seed to post Series B, very, very high revenue run rate. No VC in Europe would give them a term sheet in the pre seed.
Okay.
Literally everyone passed.
Hmm.
But the company was net profitable. They just weren't a software business at the time, but they were a very, very successful service business, and they showed a clear plan to go to software. Today, they have tremendous software, highly differentiated, highly automated, and investors want to keep piling in.
Nice.
But it didn't fit the heuristics.
Yeah.
But you don't have to fit the heuristics towards the VC market. You have to fit the heuristics towards your customers. And in
Hmm.
construction, service, get business done, deliver outcomes, earn track record, and then optionality happens.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Infra market started the same way, I
Yeah,
would
I
argue.
mean, again, just to give you an example, there they started with cement, concrete, and aggregates. And lo and behold, one fine day, one of their clients asked them, hey, can you supply yellow machines? Right? And then from there, it went into chemicals, tires, paints, natural stones, and so on and so forth. And that's how things kept unfolding.
Yeah. So that's before we stop here. So that's one other thing that I've really learned to appreciate in founders in our sectors, as complex and big but complex they are. I look for founders who look for extremely narrow ICPs, ideal
Mhm.
customer profiles. You can't be narrow enough. The fear that you can't expand your addressable market is it's usually an unwarranted fear. It's
Yeah.
quite the opposite. It's almost like in media. When you start something new, you want to have as narrow a niche as possible, as well defined an ICP as possible. And if you
Hmm.
nail that one, frequency, discovery, optionality, and track record, good
Hmm.
things typically happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shub, I feel like one of the things I should ask you as well,
Hmm.
as we wrap up here, is flip it around. So we've been talking about like what we look for,
Uh-huh.
but what is actually a major turnoff? Like what makes you run away?
Oh, I think I could maybe point to a few of those. So arrogance or lack of maturity. Like by mind you, lack of maturity is not the easiest to read. I will admit that it's one. In fact, it's one of the hardest traits in a person to judge early on. But let's say if there are visible signs early on, that's a sign to run away. Um, as I mentioned earlier, there are people, founders in our portfolio are extremely accomplished. Right, second, third time founders, sold businesses before, but who are incredibly humble and recognize,
Yes.
uh, the complexity and the difficulty of what they're getting into, and have no qualms about it. But there are also the other end, people claiming that they've figured everything out, it's going to work this way. Um, that for me is an orange to red flag situation. If someone is that confident about an industry which isn't the easiest, or certainly not that well understood, how can you be so confident in that situation? Someone who doesn't seem to be well prepared to get into the absolute minute details, or seems to brush it aside as a non-essential aspect of the conversation. People or founders who are not very good with numbers. I'll give you an example. So I was once in a conversation with, um, think of it like a blend between a design platform and a software company, a platform that combines both these aspects, where we got the data room, etc. And I had a question on, hey, there's this one number over here for revenue, but there's this another number, there's two very different numbers for revenue. Keep in mind, it's like the top line, right? Not a particularly challenging ask. And this founder, who's the CEO of the company, goes, hey, I don't know this, you need to check in with so and so person who's like his finance guy. He handles the books. That is not acceptable, and that's when I decided, there's nothing more to be, no more involvement needed here from our side. You're not like a large corporate here. You as a CEO need to know every item, right? Forget the revenue, every item you should know in and out of.
Fully agree.
Yeah, so that is not acceptable
Fully
to
agree.
to kind of take the line of a corporate CEO and say so and so will take care of it and stuff like that. Yeah, and I guess a
I
software.
need to ask McKinsey.
I need to ask McKinsey. And I wouldn't say it's a bad trait per se. The next point, it's more of a desired thing. I wish founders, once they appreciate the importance of a partnership, don't treat every interaction as a hustle and a race to quickly get commitments. That for me also is something where, over a period of time, I've realized it usually, in fact, I think we've also done this analysis. It almost never leads to a good outcome for people, those involved in
No,
that situation.
no. In fact, I respect, like this is not us, but I respect investors who invest later than us, who make it actually an investment qualifier and a criterion
Hmm.
that they don't invest in founders whom they haven't known for years or who come
Oh,
through a
okay.
source that they have known for years. There's not many out there who do it like that, but those
Hmm.
who do, I completely get where they are coming from. And
Hmm.
I actually think it's a very strong way of making sure that you're not getting into the wrong partnerships.
Yeah, I mean that is pretty cool if they indeed stick by it.
Yeah, yeah. So back to our ritual here. I think this was a great discussion.
Yeah,
Tell me what's in your calendar next week that excites you.
I think there's one firm in particular I'm quite excited about. Very different from the stuff I've seen before and the stuff I normally see. So think of an AI and cloud enabled platform which sort of streamlines the whole process of material design and research. So really digging into it, I'm finding it very intellectually stimulating, but also perhaps very interesting and different field.
It sounds really good. I'm checking my calendar. Um, so we're currently talking to a firm that is approaching the. So usually when you listen to us regularly, you will know that um, in the carbon reduction space,
Hmm.
we think there is more. What word do I now use that masks my true opinion?
BS.
Fluff.
Fluff.
that there's more fluff than substance.
Mm-hmm.
But currently, I'm talking to a firm whose substance I really like because
Okay.
their hypothesis is very close to my learnings from 10 to 15 years ago in the first clean tech wave where I covered solar, wind, and batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Was hey, it was actually the system integrators, the industrializers, the EPC technology companies that
Okay.
made a ton of money and not necessarily the ones who had the most fancy but difficult to produce or difficult to industrialize technology. And so this company is taking a bunch of off the shelf technologies, but the way they integrate it into a very repeatable system and going after a very repeatable, narrow ideal customer profile, I really like that. They represent a lot of my thesis in terms of the system integration, development, and EPC
Hmm.
being one of the most interesting ways of building a clean tech 2.0 or carbon reduction 2.0 kind of
Hmm.
companies. I'm meeting them next week again. This one, in terms of how they approach it, I really like it.
That is super cool. I think it, um, I mean, in addition to obviously solving for decarbonization, seems like a nice triangulation of what we have said before or what we have backed before along the themes of cloud manufacturing, cloud installers, that sort of, I wouldn't call it playbook, but that sort of mindset in how to create
Mindset,
a business model. Yeah,
agreed, agreed.
nice.
And there's service elements to it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Nice.
Very good. So this
Perfect.
was good after a short break. I
Yeah,
guess I'll see you again next week.
you will, sir. You will.
All right. Happy weekend, sir.
Happy weekend.
Cheers.
Cheers.